compared to other sources of reward and indeed subjective feelings of pleasure, like eating or drinking or sex. Clearly, what you do when you're engaged in those behaviors is really quite different. You seek the object of your motivation, you seek food, you seek water, you seek sex, and then you engage in a particular kind of behavior, like eating, with all of the things that happen when you eat. You taste things and you swallow them and you ingest them and glucose is released. And it's believed that at some point in that sequence, and it may be from the very first time you put the food in your mouth, you change the activity of the dopamine system, and that's been measured. So the idea with drugs, then, is that you don't have any of these, what are often called consummatory behaviors, where you put things in your mouth and eat and chew or drink or engage in sexual activity, copulation. The short-circuiting is that this goes in your arm in a vein or through your nose as smoke, and it hits that dopamine system directly and quickly without any of those other preliminaries, and hence this idea of hijacking the brain's reward system.
In the presence of cocaine, dopamine remains active in the synapses 300 times longer than in a normal state. Some studies have shown that such an avalanche of dopamine in the brain of cocaine addicts eventually damages their dopamine receptors. Although they may be self-repairing, they never regain their original efficiency even after years of abstinence. Such neurological damage can result in symptoms of depression and attention deficit problems. Under cocaine, the dopamine-flooded brain is conditioned to seek the same sensation over and over again. According to neurobiologist Wolfram Schultz, the nucleus accumbens interprets it as a reward signal.
The nucleus accumbens seems to be a structure that's more activated with rewards than the rest of the striatum through its dopamine projection. If one looks at the human brain and presents the human with a very nice rewarding picture, or with a picture of a 10-pound bill, the nucleus accumbens will get very nicely activated. And that is due to the activation of the dopamine system coming into nucleus accumbens. The striatum gets also activated through reward, but a little bit less. A reward can be a liquid, it can be food, it can be a somatosensory stimulus, a visual stimulus, it can be all kinds, it can be nice music. There's no specific sensory system for reward. The reward is defined by behavior and it has maybe three major functions. The first function may be, for example, that one comes back for more when one encounters a reward. I press a button on a machine, I don't know what happens, and the Coke comes out. And assuming that I like the Coke, I do it again. And so this is the learning function of reward. The second function is if one encounters a reward that one recognizes as such, one approaches, one goes towards the reward. From a punisher, one would go away. From a reward, one would go close. So one would say approach behavior is the second, generating approach behavior is the second function of rewards. And the third function is what many people think as a major function, it's the emotional function. It makes you happy. You get a reward and it has hedonic, the reward has hedonic properties, makes you happy, you like it, and you feel positive emotion about it. As long as you don't bring any people, any person into contact with addiction, with drugs of addiction, they won't get addicted. But if you bring 100 people with drugs in contact with drugs and addiction, some of them will get addicted. And with different drugs, different proportions will get addicted. And the difference is in the brain, quite clearly. Whether that is pathological, whether that is normal variation, I don't think it makes much of a difference. It's all the same thing. It's a spectrum of different brain function that is disturbed by drugs, and in some cases the brain won't take it and the person gets addicted. In other cases it goes away without a problem. And that is not just simply the anatomy of the brain, that's the environment, that's the social context, that's the past history of the individual, that's the living circumstances, it's the way they eat and drink. It's a lot of factors that come together. One could say in some cases that it's really like schizophrenia, a real brain disorder, and there are indications for that. That's a possibility. I really don't know.
So to me, the most important consequence of my work has been it has helped conceptualize drug addiction as a disease of the brain, where there's clear abnormalities on the way that the brain functions that translate, in this case, in disrupted behavior. If you have abnormalities on the function of your heart, it translates into improper circulation, which is very easy to understand for people, and nobody would question that if you have a myocardial infarction, you have a heart disease. Everybody will question if you have abnormal behavior because you've been taking drugs, whether you have a disease, because their immediate response is the person chooses to take drugs. So it's a choice that the individual does.
Well, I think there are people in a better position than me to give definitions of addiction. But if you ask me for my personal opinion, then it's an uncontrolled reward process, or a reward process that you cannot control by yourself, or that for some reason you don't want to control by yourself because the reward is so immense that it overruns every other reward. And in that case, it's still somewhat controlled or not. And that leads, of course, to the question of how much you're in control of your own decisions and actions.